to see each other. I love you. I'm glad that you are here. What do you doubt? Doubt is one of those emotions that probably every human being experiences at some point. I'll share something personal with you. I doubt my mechanical abilities. It probably stems from the time when I was in college and I came home for the week and I needed to change the oil in my truck, and I put it on, put it on, put it off until Friday night. And I got out there. This may have been the second time I did it by myself. My dad was gone. He was going to be getting in late from work. And I spent 3 hours turning the oil filter the wrong direction. Tore it all to pieces. So Dad couldn't do anything when he got home that night. He got up early Saturday morning. They lived in North Carolina. I was going to college in Alabama. So I had about an 8 or 10 hour drive in front of me. Dad got up early Saturday morning. It took him about 45 minutes to get the thing off. Ever since then, I just have a mental block when it comes to doing something like that. I do not have that inborn knowledge, ability, gift, talent, or whatever. But I like doing it. I like taking care of things like that myself. But I struggle with doubt. And so our car manual said it's now time to change your transmission fluid. Never done it before. I want to try it. So I downloaded an article off the internet from Popular Mechanics, and I read the thing 4 times. And then I talked to Adam a few Sundays ago. I said, Adam, can I do this? Or do I need to take it to somebody who's competent? Adam said, no, I think you can do it. So he stood out there at the door and he walked me through the process. Well, I was planning on doing it last Saturday, but I had to take Jewel to Lexington Saturday night, and so I used that as an excuse not to do it last Saturday. Got cold feet. And so I thought, well, I'm going to do it this Saturday. So I put the car up on the ramp, slide underneath it, and I don't have the right socket for the bolts. So I'm like, you know how many times I walk around that car in my mind, worried I'm going to do something wrong? Why? Because I doubt. Now, Adam doesn't have a problem. I look under a hood of the car, and I probably can't tell you 5 parts that are under that hood. I slide underneath the car on my creeper, and I look up, and I feel like I'm in preschool. I don't know what I'm looking at. But I thought I would try it. So I come to town, and I get the right socket, and I go back home, and I changed my own transmission fluid. It took me 3 hours. And my arms are weak from holding them up like this for 3 hours. But I got it done. And I feel good about myself because I got it done. Now, it might leak, and I might tear up my transmission, this week at some point, because I've only driven it from the house to here this morning. And if that happens, next Sunday service is going to be why you can't save yourself. So I've already got a plan now. Now, if I had Adam's knowledge and his confidence in that area, I wouldn't feel bad about it. Wouldn't think twice about taking care of things like that on my own. You see, I don't have that knowledge. I don't have that experience. So I doubt. Well, what do you doubt? Now, I suggest to you the reason why we doubt in all the areas that we doubt is because we're limited in knowledge and we're limited in power. Because we're human beings. And so this morning I want us to talk about 3 areas in particular that we doubt in our spiritual lives. And the same principles that deal with non-spiritual doubt are the same answers that handle our spiritual doubts. Because the answer for doubt is the same. I feel a lot more confident now to change my own oil. For one reason, I learned in college, lefty-loosey, righty-tighty. So I've never turned the oil filter the wrong direction again. But you see, you have to do it that first time. And when you do it that first time, you gain confidence where you can do it a second time. But you know, you and I, sometimes we struggle with doubt, we struggle with fear so much that we won't even do it the first time because we're afraid of failure. You know what I was thinking when I was mentally walking around the car? Now, Adam gave me a lot of confidence when he said, number one, he said, you can do it. And number two, he gave me a lot of confidence when he said, if you need me, call me. That made me feel real good. But I also didn't want to have to call him and say, Adam, I failed. I didn't want to have to admit that I couldn't do it. But then last night, I really wanted to call him and say, Adam, I did it. I did it. Now, let's have it right now. You know, again, it might start leaking and tear up the transmission. But here in Mark chapter 9, the Father has a son who is suffering from demon possession. Jesus has been up on the Mount of Transfiguration. And the Father brings His Son to the disciples. And the disciples, for whatever reason, they don't have the faith to cast this evil spirit out. And so Jesus comes down off the mount, and the Father runs to Jesus, and He falls down before Jesus, and He says, Jesus, I want you to cast this evil spirit out of my son. And Jesus says, I will if you believe. And the Father cries, and He says, Jesus, I believe, help my doubt. Isn't that what He's saying when He's saying, help my unbelief? He's saying, Jesus, I know up here that you can do it, but in here, I'm having trouble. C.S. Lewis, who wrote the Chronicles of Narnia and a lot of other books, he said, all the time when I pray, I know that God hears my prayers. Sometimes I feel that He does not. Do you struggle with that sometimes? Up here we know, but in here we doubt. And that's the kind of struggle this Father is having right here. And we as Christians sometimes feel that same anxiety. Am I doing what I can? I doubt that I can do anything better. And so I want us to look at these three areas in which we struggle with doubt. And the first is doubting our experience, doubting our conversion sometimes. Now, when we're first baptized into Christ, we're on fire. We've got a lot of enthusiasm, and we think we can conquer the world. We think we can evangelize everybody, and everybody's going to see things the same way we do. But then, as the days pass by, and the weeks go by, and the months go by as a Christian, and our answered prayers seem to get further and further and further apart. And sometimes we start thinking, well, did I really give my heart to Jesus? Am I really converted to Jesus? Am I doing what I'm supposed to do as a Christian? And doubt begins to set in. And doubt can be a real enemy for Christians. But I want you to think of this story in the Bible. Very well-known story in the Old Testament where Moses leads the Israelites out of Egypt. They come to the Red Sea. Moses raises his rod over the Red Sea. The waters divide and they walk across on dry ground. Estimated about 2 million people. God has led them through the wilderness with a pillar of fire at night and a pillar of cloud during the day. When they got to the Red Sea and they were prepared to cross over the Red Sea, you can imagine how long it would take 2 million people to walk across on dry ground through the Red Sea. And so the text says that that pillar of cloud covered over the Israelites where the Egyptians couldn't see them. And that gave them time to cross through. What a great experience in learning to trust God. And learning that God is going to be there. But you know what? It didn't take long for the Israelites to start doubting. It did not take long for the Israelites to start asking themselves, is God really here with us in the wilderness? Is God going to take care of our needs? We're hungry and we're thirsty. Does God really love us? Well, what was the answer to that? Yes, God was still there. But they didn't feel like He was there. God was still there taking care of them, and God provided water from a rock for them, and He blew in quail, and He gave them manna from heaven. God really was in control. And God really was going to do what was right for the Israelites. We doubt sometimes that we're not experiencing God's love like we should. But the Israelites had to remind themselves that God promised that He would take care of them. And when we put our faith in ourselves, then we doubt. But when we put our faith in the faithfulness of God, then we can know that we're going to succeed. Let me bring to your remembrance our lesson from Psalm 42. The psalmist where the psalm is based on the psalm as the deer pants for the water. And let me remind you that when the psalmist wrote those words, he felt distant from God. He had doubts. Why do you despair, O my soul? He asked in verse 5, and why have you become disturbed within me? And part of his doubts arose because of the enemies that were criticizing him, that were around him. His enemies were making fun of him, and they were saying all day long, where is your God? And the psalmist had doubts. But the very last verse of that psalm, he says, hope in God. For I shall yet praise Him, the help of my countenance and my God. The psalmist found strength and confidence in worshiping God. And he was able to come through the fog of doubt and into the presence of God in his worship. Are there stars out there right now? Can you see the sky where you're sitting through those windows? Do you see the stars? You can't. But does that mean they're not out there? When the sun shines bright, we can't see the stars. And the sun shines bright when we're in worship to God. The Apostle Paul writes in 2 Corinthians chapter 1 and verse 20 that all of the promises of God are yes. In studying with Christians, elderly Christians sometimes, they think, well, I hope I've lived good enough. We can never live good enough. That's why we have the promises of God. That's the grace of God. But doubt assails us, and doubt makes us question whether or not we are truly converted to God because we're not doing enough. In the parable of the sower in Luke chapter 8, one of those soils, the soil that is symbolized by the thorns, Jesus says those thorns are worries about this life. What is that? Doubt. And if we're not careful, then we'll allow Satan through doubt to come in and steal the seed out of our heart. We'll think, well, I wasn't originally converted, I'm not converted, I'm not really a Christian, I'm just going to give it up because I'm failed. You see how the devil works? Making us question, making us doubt the love of God. Another area that we doubt in the area of our Christianity is that sometimes we feel inadequate as a Christian. Now, first of all, look at the words of Isaiah.